Alrighty, well, we are here with John Chasteen. He's one of the pastors at Redemption Hill Church in Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to be discussing today for this week's topic of establishing community partnerships, especially with things like other churches, maybe local schools, local businesses, local nonprofits, that sort of thing. And so we are walking through the kind of the phases of planning a church, and we're kind of in that establishing phase. We've launched, things are getting going, and now we are strengthening some of our existing contacts and connections we made when kind of first came to the area or first got started. And now we're starting to build a little bit more of a collaborative network, both with churches and groups outside churches. So John here, his church, Redemption Hill, have done a great job with this, and so we're going to pick his brain and glean some wisdom about how to best form some of those community partnerships. So John, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you guys.
I appreciate it. And first of all, let's get to know you and your story and Redemption Hill story a little bit more. So share a little bit about why Boston, how you got there, or if you already were there, and kind of your role with the church.
Sure, yeah. Real quick, I grew up in the local church. My dad was a Southern Baptist pastor. A good experience for me, came to faith at a young age. Really in college, that God really just started doing a great work in my life, and my hunger for the Word was growing, and I had opportunities to teach the Word, and so felt like that I should steward that gift. And so I went to seminary at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. When I first landed, I had this thought that I'd probably get a master's and then go to an established church. But as I stepped onto the seminary campus, I started hearing for the first time about church planting. I'd really never heard about it. Wasn't even on my radar. And started hearing about that as one of the most effective ways to do evangelism. And so as professors shared about that, I really just felt a sense and a desire to be a part of church planting. And so I finished my master's work, and I didn't have any clear direction, like where do you go plant a church? And so I entered into the PhD program and got accepted. And so I kept walking down this academic road as God was opening doors and wanted to steward those gifts as well. And when I entered the PhD program, I also started a full-time ministry position with a church in Durham, North Carolina. And when I took the student ministry position, they told me, hey, this summer, you're taking the students to Worcester, Massachusetts. And so I'd never been far, as north as New York City. That's as far as I'd been. And so we went to Worcester, and I took our students 2 summers in a row. And in the second summer that we went, I brought in a missionary kind of catalyst that shares about needs in the area. And they shared with our group about the great need for mission work in the Northeast, and particularly in the Boston area. And so I was bringing this person in to share with our students, and lo and behold, like God was using this person really to spark. He was speaking to me. And so that very next day we went and it was the end of our week, and so we took our students to Boston to kind of do like a fun day in the city. And it was through that day, my wife was with me, and we had our kids, and seeing the churches that were now just tourist hotspots and museums, and going to Harvard and seeing the history of Harvard and the once vibrant faith of New England that had so dwindled down, and really God just burdened my heart for this area. So that day, me and my wife walking back just looked at each other, and it was just between both of us a sense from the Spirit of God that we were to come back to Boston and plant a church. And so that night I reached out to one of my seminary buddies, Tanner Turley. He's our lead pastor. My first class at Southeastern and his, we had marriage and family together in the master work, and then we did PhD work together. And so I knew he had been planning for a while to come to Boston and plant a church. And so I shot him an email and said, hey, I don't know if you're here already or not, but man, I prayed for you today. I'd love to hear how things are going. I was mainly reaching out not to say, hey, let's plant a church together, but he was the only guy who knew anything about Boston and just wanted to hear. And so he replied back and said, hey, I'm not in Boston yet. I'm moving up next summer. Let's grab breakfast and talk about what's going on. And so within the next month, we started meeting at Bojangles. Oh, I miss Bojangles. We don't have Bojangles in Boston,
had to
and
ship
that's
you a
great.
biscuit.
Don't take it for granted there in the South. But we started meeting at Bojangles every week. And the first time that I met him, man, he just shared the story of how he felt called to go plant a church in Boston, but he didn't want to go alone. He wanted to go as a team. And he shared with me about how two of the core units of this team within the past month had basically just backed out. And so he said, man, I've been praying for another elder pastor quality kind of guy that can lead with me. And so I'm hearing him share that, and I'm like reflecting on my end and what God's been doing. And man, as we continue to talk philosophy of ministry and theology, it became pretty clear that it would be best for the kingdom if we partnered up together to go plant a church. And so
Nice.
We basically spent the next 9 months fundraising and casting vision and planning to transition to Boston. And we moved here in June of 2010. So that's kind of the short story of how and why Boston.
Yeah, and I know my wife and I visited Boston last fall, and for very similar reasons. There's a very high percentage of people who don't know Jesus. A lot of churches that, as you mentioned, are shutting down, and when we toured, the old Trinity Church downtown, and several of the others have cornerstones from the 1600s and early 1700s, and they were these bastions of evangelical faith for maybe even centuries. And now you have to pay at the door to even go in, or they're kind of fenced off a little bit, and so it's extremely sad. And so the need for New England for church planting is it's extreme. States like Maine and New Hampshire and Massachusetts. You got above 95% of people who have no relationship with Jesus, no connection with the local church. And so I'm very thankful that our North American Mission Board that we partner with are really focusing on getting guys like yourself up there. So thanks for sharing the story a little bit. What exactly is your role there at the church for kind of the day in and day out of the ministry?
Yeah, great question. So when we moved up here in 2010, Tanner Turley is our lead pastor, and we work using a team model and a plurality of elders. So I'm an elder on this team. Though Tanner takes the primary lead in vision, we all sit at the table and really own it as a team, which has been one of the beauties of this context and planning. My official title is I'm the pastor of mission and discipleship. But to answer your question, I do a little bit of everything. When I first moved here in 2010, I worked bivocational. I was a server at P.F. Chang's for about 2.5 years. Nice. And so about every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, you could find me serving at P.F. Chang's. I primarily chose those nights so that the rest of the week I could free up to finish my PhD dissertation and do church planning work. But I do anything. So discipleship and mission, I take the lead in our local mission and spreading all the way to our international mission partnerships. That includes church planting in Greater Boston to India, and also a lot of our local just mission work in the community. As I'm going to share in a little bit, I take the lead with that.
Nice.
I also have a hand in our finances. We don't have the margin to hire a financial secretary, so I've taken a good bit of the in and out of check writing and overseeing the financials of Redemption Hill. That's not what I want to do long term, but when you go into church planning, you really have to be a generalist in a lot of ways, and be willing to, hey, whatever's got to get done, you just get it done. I lead a community group in my home, and I've been doing that from the very beginning. I still do. Right now, our group's meeting on Monday night, my goal is to reach people with the gospel. So people work, prioritizing people work. and making disciples who make disciples.
Nice.
Um,
I'm glad you
yeah.
said that. We really heavily focus in our classes for this particular minor about really building a solid foundation on the Great Commission. So if we're not, making disciples who make disciples, then why are we planting churches? So we kind of put, the mission of God and the gospel before the method of planting a church. And so I appreciate you focusing on that and staying with that. So let's go ahead and jump into the topic for today of kind of establishing some of these community partnerships. And so some of the questions we'll go through, talk a little bit about before you guys kind of got started, as you're getting up into the city and getting your feet wet and kind of learning the area. And then also, you guys have been several years old as a church, and you're establishing maybe some new partnerships or strengthening others. So kind of first question, what was the first group or organization that you contacted in the city when you were planning the church plant?
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to do really well was to network with other SBC and gospel-centered churches and church plants in Greater Boston. And so when I came along with Tanner, he had already been in the Boston kind of pipeline for 2 or 3 years before I came on the scene, and he had done a really good job of networking with, who's there in SBC life, and then who are other like-minded gospel-centered churches and church plants in Boston that would give him any time that he could pick their brain and learn on, hey, what's going on in the city? Where are the greatest needs in the city? Because we started out first with Boston, but Boston is, millions of people. So it's like for us to go from Boston to actually targeting into, we're in Medford, which is 5 miles north of Boston. That took some networking and with the local churches in the area.
So essentially, your first contacts were the local churches, and I think that's really essential, especially if you're going to an area that you are unfamiliar with and you don't know. We even, especially here at a school, we believe that a school doesn't plant churches; that churches plant churches. And I think connecting with the pastors and leaders there is highly essential. Were you able to establish pretty good relationships with these churches as you were getting started and even continuing to today?
Yeah. So a little background here. I would say that it's essential to have a sending church and then a supporting church on the ground. So for us, Open Door Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina was our sending church. That was the church that Tanner was a part of in seminary. Some of the other core team members that moved with us to Boston were out of that church. I was actually the only one that was not a part of Open Door Baptist Church. But what I did in that 9 months between me deciding, hey, I'm gonna transition to Boston, and I was still a student minister in Durham, I actually went to the internship on Monday nights at Open Door Baptist Church and participated with them and our leadership team in that internship as a way to be a part of this church sending us out from Raleigh. And then on the ground in Boston, our supporting church has been Hope Fellowship Church. They're a church about 2 miles from our target area. They've been in existence since about 2001, and their lead pastor, Curtis Cook, has really taken us under his wings. He's mentored, coached us. They were the church where we primarily attended the first 9 months of being in Boston before we launched our public services. That was really healthy for our families. Just imagining moving to Boston, we knew nobody. So to get plugged into a supporting church that cared for our families, provided some community, even as we were engaging in the mission of God, was very beneficial. And to hear somebody who had been there 10 years, almost 10 years before we got on the field, to hear, man, what did you do well? What did you not do well? What can we learn from? Help us to learn our target area. And this relationship with Hope Fellowship, our supporting church, is so great that, they've even handed keys over to their building to us so that I can get in their building anytime I want. We hold a lot of our elder and staff meetings. We've even done some baptism services there. And so it's been a huge blessing to have somebody that's just 2 miles away to come alongside of this journey and walk it with us.
That's really cool. in so much of church life that we've seen here in the States, especially, just a lot of competition, a very kind of competitive nature to churches, and afraid that we're going to steal people. But when you're in a city that's 97% lost, I always, tell people, like, we're fighting against someone else. We're not fighting against you and your church trying to steal your people. We're trying to steal people from Satan. And so let's collaborate and work together for that. We kind of mentioned Hope Fellowship kind of helping you out as you were getting ready, being that really strong supporting church. What were some other churches helping with, in maybe some kind of practical ways, sharing some resources or just providing encouragement? Tell a little bit about some of the other churches there in the area that were kind of stepped alongside you guys, especially as you were kind of in the planning and pre-launch type phase.
Yeah, so one other thing that Hope Fellowship did before I share these other churches is in addition to us, just kind of calling that our church home for the first 9 months, they allowed Tanner to come up and preach. They allowed us to cast vision. They've encouraged their people, hey, if you feel led to go financially support them or even to join them, we want to bless that. So that
Nice.
to even have a church bring us in and say, hey, if you want to go help them plant this church, we would love for you to go. And we probably got, I think, maybe 5 or so people from
Wow.
Hope Fellowship Church that joined with us and became a part of our launch team to help us. So that was a blessing as well. Some of the other churches, our first few months in Boston, we tried to get FaceTime with any church planter that would give us time. I think within the first month, the city that we're in is called Medford. We met with 2 actually church planters in Medford that were closing their doors.
Wow.
So, this was like, we didn't know that. We're like, hey, we knew these guys were in the city, but there was still room for us. And so we're like, hey, let's get together and talk. You guys are in the city. And we're meeting with them and saying, yeah, we're actually closing down the doors. We're not going to make it.
Yeah.
And so we're here thinking, hey, we're going to plant a church, and hearing this discouraging news of even 2 church plants in our area that are shutting down. But we were asking them, what's going on? Like, we were trying to learn, okay, if you're not making it, why aren't you making it? And what can we do differently to make sure that 5 years from now, we're not in the same position?
Yeah.
So we networked with Southern Baptist church plants. We networked with other gospel center churches. We were meeting with Acts 29 churches, and others. Some of our Sundays, so that Hope Fellowship was primarily where we worship, but we also tried to go, I want to say maybe 10 other churches we worshiped at, and we would go with our team and worship on a Sunday and then debrief and say, okay, what are they doing to reach lost people? How are they using Sunday mornings to do that? What do they do well? What do they not do well? What can we learn and take away from that? So, we just used the time to be students. We didn't show up in the city having it all figured out. We just came as learners to say, we want to learn. And if somebody's doing good work in our city, we want to learn from them. We also, there were some other church plants launching. They were about a half a year ahead of us. So we went to some launch services and just learned, what they're doing. What are they looking like? What are they preaching? How's their music? How are their services? What are they doing for kids? So that's a little bit of how other churches played a role in that kind of planning pre-launch phase.
Oh, so what about now? After you guys have been established there for a while and kind of strengthened some of these relationships with churches, what are the churches there in Boston kind of doing together to collaborate to do ministry in the city? Maybe even bring in some some more church planters, or even just for encouragement. So what does that kind of collaboration look like now?
So we are a part of a network called the Pillar Network. It is a network within SBC Life of like-minded churches, and we're primarily cooperating and partnering for the sole purpose of planning and revitalizing churches. And so in the Boston area, Hope Fellowship's a Pillar Network church. There's a church that is 2 towns over that is a Pillar Network church. There's a church downtown Boston, another southeastern guy that's a Pillar Network church, and there's a guy who's apprenticing to plant a church in the next town beside us, who came from a Pillar Network church. And so what we found very helpful, in addition to having a sending church and a supporting church, but to have a network of churches that we share resources. We actually just returned last week from a conference with this Pillar Network. It was based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we've got churches in this network, not only in Boston, but in Seattle and in Miami, and all over the U.S. And we're like-minded, and we're sharing resources, and we're committed to learning from each other. So with these churches, we have a Skype every other month, the first Wednesday of the month, and there's a topic that church planners are wrestling with, and we're coming to the table and saying, how are you addressing these challenges in your city? How can we learn from each other? Additionally, the beauty of this network has also been, the goal is to plant churches. So right now we've got a guy who's apprenticing with us. He moved here in July, and he was from a Pillar Network church in Georgia that we networked with, and he landed up here to plant a church in Arlington, Massachusetts. It's like a mile down the road from my house. And so he's with us for the next year. He's apprenticing with us, learning
Nice.
from us. He's like staff with us, though he's living in Arlington. He's doing mission in Arlington. And the goal is that in the next few months we can get a community group started in Arlington, and that can move forward to a launch for him in about a year.
Cool.
And so that's a little bit of how other churches, how we're partnering with. We view, I think you see this when you move to such an unchurched area like the Northeast, but like there's no room here for competition. I mean, you just show up and like, even Redemption Hill, we have 180 to 200 coming on a Sunday, but that's like just a dent in the 60,000 people that are in our city.
Yeah.
And so 1 mile over is Arlington with probably 40 or 50,000 people. And so like come on, like there's a great need. And so we're just partnering together
Great.
to see gospel work happen. So even like a Hope Fellowship that says, hey, to their people, if you live in Medford, why don't you think about going and joining Redemption Hill to plant in Medford? We're challenging our people now with Kevin Sanders here. Hey, if you live in Arlington, why not consider going to Arlington and being a part of this church plant? And so it's really, we're planting a church, and it's not about our church, it is about the kingdom. And the kingdom is far much greater than Redemption Hill Church.
Man, if we were in a church service, I would amen that really, really loud. So thanks for sharing. But yeah, it's exciting to see there's a high sense of collaboration among a lot of new churches and church plants here in the U.S. and I even saw it in Calgary when I was there last week. Churches getting together. There's 15 churches getting together saying we got 1.3 million people to reach, and there's only 22 of us churches. And so how are we going to do this? And so 15 of the pastors are getting together, and churches that have never even thought of planting before, never been on their radar, are now seeing, okay, what do we need to do to help start some new ministries and stuff. And so that sense of collaboration, working together, especially when you're in a pocket that is high level of lostness. I mean, there's no competition except for against Satan. So, but thanks for sharing that. Let's transition a little bit into how you've established some partnerships with non-church groups. So let's say some local schools, local businesses, maybe some nonprofit groups. So let's spend a few minutes, and I just want you to really just kind of share just kind of some stories, what the groups you've done, why you kind of reached out to them, and kind of how you partner with them for the sake of your city. There's a foundation of making disciples with all these partnerships, of course, but there's also just a sense of just really blessing other groups and endeavors, even if they're not Christian, in a lot of ways. So share a little bit about what you guys are doing to kind of establish those partnerships.
Yeah, one of the slogans we say for a church is that we want to be in the city and for the city. And so we're all the time asking, if our church ceased to exist, would our city even notice it? Like if we died this year, would we even make an impact on our city? And I think that's a great question to ask. Like, we want to introduce people to Jesus Christ and an eternal relationship with Him, but we also want to see that relationship have a tangible impact on our city. And so because of that, when we came to Medford, one of the things that we did is we just started learning, what are some areas that we can go to and meet a tangible need in our city. And early on, we met with a lady who works with women and sex trafficking, and she shared this statement with us. She said her kind of slogan for working with them was, "We're going to love you longer than you can distrust us." In other words, our love is we're going to outlove your distrust of us. And in our city, in Medford, which is 75–80% Catholic, most of them, a lot of them, do not trust the church in light of the Catholic scandals that's gone down. Most people even call themselves an NCP, or non-practicing Catholic.
Yeah.
And so, we kind of took that as saying, you know what, people aren't like cheering that we're here to plant a church. Oftentimes you show up in a city in the South and it's like, yeah, they're here to plant a church, and first Sunday you fill the doors. Like, nobody's like excited that we're here to plant a church. So to take the approach of, we're in the city for the city, we're going to love you longer than you can distrust us. So we just say, there's a lot of people in our city, until we gotta kind of break these walls down of distrust, they're not even going to care what we have to say. And so we just kind of taken that approach. So here are a few areas that we reached. First, Tufts University is in Medford. It's like a top 30 university in the U.S.
Yeah.
And one of the appealing parts of coming to Medford is that we want to see students reach on that campus. So we just went to the campus and said, man, is there anybody we can partner with? And so the only evangelical organization they actually allow was InterVarsity. In fact, a few years ago, they actually de-recognized InterVarsity, and so that there was no evangelical presence on this campus, further highlighting the need for churches to be planted. But I think now they've been re-recognized. But our very first year, within the first few months, went there and met the leader of InterVarsity and just said, man, we're a new church. How can we serve you? We did I think we bought some pizzas and put the office on or something. Our initial idea was to do a Monday Night Football with the Patriots, but we soon realized that Tufts students really don't care about sports. And so we're like, well, what'll pull students? They said, well, put a show of The Office on or something. So we did that, connected, and came away with like one student, just one.
Wow.
That was saying, you know what? I like I like the vision. It's compelling. I want to be a part. And that one student turned into, on our launch, like 20 students.
Wow.
And so, as you move into a city, what you're praying for is that person of peace, that one person that'll just get it, that can be a mouthpiece and be a bringer. And so that was one area. Another area we went to was the Boys and Girls Club. And we just met with their director and said, man, we just want to learn. Are there any tangible ways that we can serve? And so as many of our partnerships said, hey, we want to come do a mission trip in Boston, one of the first places we went was the Boys and Girls Club. And what we did is we went down there not sharing the gospel. They weren't interested in that, but we said, hey, man, they were low staffed and they had nobody to clean the facilities. So we went in doing light construction, cleaning, painting. We had 2 teams in there the month before we launched, and no strings attached. We just came there to serve. And so kind of looking down the road, once we launched in a dance studio, is where we met for the first couple of years. And then that dance studio closed down and they sold the building, so we had to find a new space. When we were looking for a new space a couple of years in, the Boys and Girls Club knew this because we had developed such a great relationship through serving over the first years, and they came to us and said, we want you to meet in our space.
Wow.
And so that wasn't like our motivation when we first landed, but that's just a tangible picture of how we've served, and it opened up a door for us in the city where they even came to us and said, we'd love for you to just use our space on Sundays to worship. And that till this day, that's where we are. We're worshiping in the Boys and Girls Club, awesome. And above it's a theater, so we've kind of got a combo deal there. Another place that we went to was the Medford Housing Authority. Almost every probably city has a housing authority for low-income housing, specifically in cities. And we went to the volunteer coordinator who oversees resident services, just started developing a relationship with her, and just said, how can we serve? There were a couple of community centers through the Medford Housing Authority that that we put on some programming. We did some ESL classes. We started doing some movies with the senior citizens. We did some food and clothing drives. And then now for like 4 years, we've done a Thanksgiving meal giveaway. We just went to the Medford Housing Authority and said, look, our people want to provide Thanksgiving meals. If you can get us a list of names, we will deliver them. And so last year, I think we hand delivered over 75 like Thanksgiving meals. Like we go to Costco, get a turkey, we get bread, we get stuffing. Like it's all canned. All they got to do is cook it, and we go and our people hand deliver these, meet these people, and we say we want to display the love of Christ as we declare the love of Christ, display and declare, and that's one way we can display. And so this is cool. Within like the first year of being in Medford, this lady came to us and said, I want you to be on a committee at the Medford Housing Authority representing the church sector in our city.
Wow.
And like that's huge, because in our city, which is predominantly Catholic, there are 2 large Catholic churches, and she didn't go to them, and she is Catholic. She came to us.
Wow.
And like that showed us is that, man, there are churches that have been in our city for hundreds of years, and yet like they are not seeking to be a tangible, like in the city, for the city. Within the first year, she recognized that's what we were about. And so I sit at the table every quarter at a meeting with the Medford Housing Authority, and have a voice to speak into what's going on in our city and how our church can come and volunteer and serve.
Wow.
Tangible needs. Here's another cool one. In this kind of mindset, we said early on that with being in the city, for the city, we've just branded Serve Medford. A lot of our things we'll just call Serve Medford. We also have a Serve Medford week in the summer where we'll bring a lot of our church partner churches in, and we'll just have a huge high impact 1 week of the year. And the very first year, I went to the head of the parks in Medford and talked to the foreman and said, look, man, I've got teams coming up. I know we've got 25 to 30 parks in our city. Is there any way that you could use our people to serve? And he said, yes. He said, man, I'm understaffed, but there are needs left and right. He said, I can provide the resources if you can provide the people. And so for the past 5 years, we've provided partnering churches that have come up, and I'll go to them and say, this week of the year, I've got 10 to 15 people, and he'll have them at a park a day for the whole week. And we'll be doing anything from dumping sand to mulch to repairing park benches. And we're not just doing, we're doing those things, but we're also meeting families in the park. Yeah. And so they're seeing, who is this? Like, you guys have your Serve Medford t-shirts on, and we're inviting them to a big block party that we're throwing at the end of the week, and we're doing face painting and balloon animals with their kids at the park. And so that opened up a huge door for down the road when we've wanted to do things in the park, like Easter egg hunts or throw a big block party, that now I've developed a relationship with the foreman, and he basically, no lie, we were at a meeting because the city has a commission that oversees the parks with this guy, and I'm like the first year telling him what we want to do for the Easter egg hunts, and this guy Mike popped up and he said, look, these guys, you don't know what they've done in our parks. You let them do whatever they want to do and don't charge them a dime. Wow. And so that's just a testimony to just, man, we've come with an attitude of serving, and it's opened us favor from the city. So I know I've been talking a lot, but those are a few of the tangible things we've done and that we continue to do in our city.
No, I think it's great, and I love it's quite diverse even in the different sectors that you're touching into. So you got a university setting, you've got a boys and girls club setting, a housing authority, kind of helping maybe some low income type things. You got a park and recreation type thing. It's really just finding those ways, as you're saying, in the city for the city. And you're the we had another planter we did a Skype with a couple weeks ago, and he said the same thing. He said we want to be in the city for the city. We're talking about doing some advertising, and he said their best way of advertising for the new church was just being in the city for the city, and they did that. And so I love that that's kind of becoming a really strong, healthy, I think, gospel-centered mantra of really just kind of not being in the city to challenge it and to condemn it and to get onto it when it does anti-Christian things. But you're saying we're going to love our city regardless, and as you're saying, love them to where they would miss us if we were gone. That if we shut our doors, they wouldn't want us to leave. What would it look like for our cities to ask churches to come and ask churches to stay open and ask churches to be more involved? I think that's how we're going to see our cities really renewed with the gospel. And well, man, let me. I just want to ask you. It's kind of like a summarizing thought, summarizing question. 'Cause I mean, I appreciate so much everything you've shared. This is gold, and really going to help. I mean, me personally, our students, and I just kind of want to kind of wrap it up with this final question. And you kind of hit on this a little bit, but maybe summarize for us. Why do you think it is essential as a church to partner with non-church groups in a community? Why is it essential?
Yeah, a few things. Most likely, unless you grew up in the city, you don't know many people in the city that you've just moved to. And so getting involved with non-church groups put us around lost people. And so, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club or the Medford Housing Authority, for the Medford Housing Authority, we're able to go into their community center, and we're doing kids camps in the summer during our Serve Medford week, and they're allowing us to teach the story of Scripture from creation to new creation.
Wow.
And we're loving on their kids, and they're begging us, like, when are you guys coming back again? So it's given us a context. Like, if you're going to plant a church, and you're not just trying to gather other Christians in the city, which is not what church planting is. Church planting is to see people come to faith in Christ. And like you want to provide a healthy church for those who need a healthy church to get plugged in, but you're primarily there for those who don't know Christ.
Right.
Well, then you need a mechanism for how are you going to get around and know people who don't know Christ. For us, it's been primarily through a lot of these community avenues where we've served. And additionally, if you're planting a church, most church plants, I know there's some different situations, but most church plants, you're not going to have a physical building.
Right.
We do have a guy near us who planted and he launched, just crazy scenario. He actually got a building, and he had a partnership help come in and help him buy that early on. But I don't know many church plants that launch with their own building, which means you have no 24/7 presence in your city.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have a physical building that somebody can drive by and say, "Oh, there's Redemption Hill." We have no like 24/7 sign up. And so how does our city know that we even exist? Well, it's primarily through our people and through the things we do in our city. And so whether it's our Easter egg hunts, or our block parties, or our Serve Medford week, or our soccer nights serving, or our fall festival, or the Medford Housing Authority, what we say, this is the cumulative effect. Like, we may not see a ton of fruit from each of these individual serve opportunities, but the cumulative effect of reminding people, oh, there is a church in our city, Redemption Hill. They're in the city for the city, and it's continuing to create awareness for people so that when they have that crisis, when they need a place to reach out, they know Redemption Hill is in the city. So those are a few of the reasons why we see that it's really helped us, and I think it's important as you go to plant a church in a city.
Oh man, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate what you guys are doing up there, and it's really neat because I've being in kind of some of the academic church planting realm, I get to talk to a lot of leaders from across the nation. I get to either Skype them in or email or get up with them in some other way. And Redemption Hill keeps coming up every time I turn around. It's really kind of cool to hear that you guys are really being a good, solid example of a healthy way to start a church in a tough area, and it's by simple making disciples, loving your city. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing for our country. For years, I've had a heart for Boston, and God hasn't called us there, but He has called us to help and support you guys. So if however we can do that, man, please let us know. You got a class down here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'll be praying for you guys. As we kind of close out, what's a specific prayer request that we can pray for your church for?
So in light of what I just shared, on November the 21st, I believe that's a Saturday, that's when we're going to go deliver. Our goal is 80 to 100 Thanksgiving meals to low-income families in our city. We've seen now a handful of these start coming to our church, but it's going to be probably 80 or so contacts with most likely a pretty high chance that they don't know Christ. So you can pray. Pray for us as we deliver that. Pray for our people, that God will continue to work boldness in our people, to not be ashamed of the gospel. So that would be, one that's really present before us right now.
Excellent. Well, we'll be praying for these, and when the students watch these lectures online, and then when we meet in class, we'll be sure to pray for you, and then also for Tanner, for your church, as you are seeking to make disciples in the city for the city. So, John, appreciate your time. Can't thank you enough.